Hi, this is Thinking Solo. My name's Ryan DeRusso, and I'm a fee-only financial planner. Today, I want to talk to you about the 5 steps to take before moving to self-employment. Working for yourself or thinking solo is one of the fastest growing types of employment. It can offer great things, flexibility, potentially higher pay, potentially shorter hours, but the opposite is also true. So setting yourself up for success before you step away from the day job is key to your, long-term future success. So squash that subscribe button and let's get started. First step in going solo is building a backstop to your isolation. This has nothing to do with the financial side of things. It's only mental. What we're dealing with is the fact that you're going to be alone and you're going to be alone a lot. So can you handle that isolation? When I first went solo, I was a writer. I was naturally introverted. The idea of working from home by myself didn't really bother me. But even in that reality, after the first week, it might have been great. Second week, a little less so. By the third week, you are looking for any conversation that doesn't involve your cat or dog. And that's what building a backstop to the isolation is. You need to test yourself to see whether you can actually handle this. So many, gurus or whatever will say to test out the idea of working for yourself. We've all had experience with that over the past few years. How did you do with that? Should you test yourself again? Can you still handle that? Go ahead and do that. That's fine. But you need to go further. You need to build backstops into your isolation. This means, do you know someone who's also going to go solo? Can you work with them? Are they willing to work with you on a regular basis? Do you have an intramural league that you've been meaning to sign up for? Are there networking groups that you've been wanting to be a part of? This is the time to join them. What you're doing is by setting up these very clear ways to interact, you're kind of tricking the mind into realizing you're not so isolated. You always have something to look forward to. Maybe it's a basketball game at the end of the day. Maybe it's that networking mixer, whatever. You got to find something that protects your day, and so you're not just relying on your significant other, your kids, but you have something outside of that to help make it work. When you work for yourself, there's a fine line between the personal and the business. And how you manage that line, it will dictate whether you end up successful or not. You also have to remember, as a self-employed business owner, that you're both employee and employer. And as the employer, you have to pay yourself as the employee. What you pay yourself will be dictated on 2 things: how much you make and how much you spend. That's why the second step in moving towards self-employment is cutting back to move forward. In order to give yourself time to become profitable in your self-employment venture, you also have to manage your own expenses as an individual. If you spend a ton of amount on entertainment and fine dining and other things, then you're increasing the amount that you have to make in order for your business to become profitable. It doesn't mean that you can never spend on these things. It just, the more you can cut back, the more you can give yourself time and your business time to become profitable. So going through your expenses and figuring out what doesn't need to be spent today, looking for the difference between needs and wants. So those things that you have to have, you keep, and those wants, which ones can be cut back or reduced to reduce the amount that you have to pay yourself every month to cover the expenses. Whatever you come up with in this budgeting exercise will end up becoming your sort of target salary. And depending on how successful the business is, that number can go up, but you don't want it to go below that. And if it goes below that, that's when your business could potentially fail. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And so the lower you can get that from the onset, the better chance you have for long-term success. There's a specific risk that those who work for themselves or have uneven pay cycles face. It comes from the fact that you're waiting for a check, maybe from work that you've already done or doing. Meanwhile, those monthly expenses keep coming in at the exact same time each month. This dichotomy creates a dangerous situation where if you don't manage the rate of pay correctly, you could be paying more for basic services because you're putting on credit card that you're not able to pay off, or you're having to dip into a loan of some sort, which is, again, you're paying the interest as well. This, not only that, it could really hurt your credit score. You're wanting to avoid this in the self-employment world, but it's something that you have to prepare for from the onset. And by preparing for it, you need to understand sort of how your industry pays. Say you're a lawyer who only gets paid once a case has finalized. Well, you need to plan for that pay cycle up front. So how are you going to manage expenses in the 6 months that it may take for the case to close? If you work on smaller projects, maybe the timeline between the pay cycle is a little shorter, but the amount you receive in that time may not be nearly as high. So how do you manage that and the monthly expenses coming in? There's certain ways to handle this. If you work on really large time frames, like if you're a contractor or something like that, then build in times to get paid throughout the course of the project. That's always a good strategy. One, it protects you from a bad client who won't pay you anything at the end, but it also ensures that you're receiving cash flow in the process. The other thing you can do is, once you know that pay cycle and you know that it's a long pay cycle, then you can add more money to a short-term checking account, savings account, something that's easily accessible to you, just in case you need it. But you can't prepare for that unless you know your pay cycle going in. So have a good idea based on the industry and job that you perform. Begin finding clients right now. There's only one moment in your self-employment journey where you can guarantee income is coming in, and that is right now before you leave your current job. Why? It's because pay cycles work on, typically, if you're a regular salaried employee, every 2 weeks. On top of that, you may get a severance when you leave your job. That's why a lot of people go into self-employment. Use that time to your advantage, where you have money coming in, but you're working on other clients' work to then be paid in a few weeks or months or whatever, whenever the paychecks run out from your employer. It's the only chance that you can guarantee that that's happening. So starting now while you're still employed is so key to getting a great start when you are on your own. It gives you flexibility to plan, and it gives you a sense of purpose in those first few days and weeks in which you're working for yourself, and there's fewer clients lined up typically. This may create some long nights. Like, before you leave your day job, you may have to work into the night a little bit more or work off hours, but it's so worth it, especially in those first few weeks, because having sort of that knowing exactly what you're going to do in those first few weeks when you step away is really key, not only to sort of your income, but also your mental side of things as well. The final step as you begin to move towards self-employment is learning to treat yourself like an employee. As I mentioned earlier, like when you work for yourself or you run your own business, you're both the employee and an employer. So what does this mean? As an employer, you're at the whim of whatever the business needs. If the business needs long nights, you're working long nights. If the business needs investment, the investment's coming from you most often. But on the flip side, as the employee, treat yourself like an employee. And this involves giving yourself a regular paycheck. The number that we had developed earlier with regards to your budget, this should be your salary, whether you're doing good or bad, at least at first. And why is that? Because when things are going good and you're paying yourself that salary, money is building in your business account. When things are going bad and you can't necessarily cover your salary, or you just barely get by covering your salary, you still have a backstop to your income in the business account. And this can be used to protect you from running off back to a workplace at the slightest slowdown in client cadence. But it also, as an employee, you should also be rewarded for good years. So once that sort of backstop gets too large, then you give yourself a bonus, just like you would an employee who's performed really well in a very good year. It's this little tip and tactic that provides security in your business and protects you as you kind of grow in that first year. Because so often when you're first starting out, you're just getting by type of thing. You don't necessarily have a large backstop, but through this process you can build that backstop, and it can protect you long term. This has been Thinking Solo. Make sure to squash that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.